The dinner rush at La Cille was in full swing, the kind of night where the clatter of silverware and the murmur of refined conversation formed a hum that never quite died down. Sadie moved through the chaos with the precision of someone who had memorized every step of this ballet. A sharp pivot to dodge a wayward elbow, a swift reach to balance a precarious tray, a polite nod to an impatient diner, it was second nature. She had worked here long enough to know the clientele, the ones who treated waitstaff like invisible furniture and the ones who at least bothered with a perfunctory smile. Emmett West, however, was in a category of his own. He was the type who made people feel small just by existing in the same room. His table, situated in the restaurant's most coveted corner, was a spectacle of wealth and dominance. Men in tailored suits, women in jewelry so heavy it seemed to anchor them to their seats, and Emmett at the center of it all, exuding a kind of arrogance that made the air feel thinner around him. His laughter was just a little too loud, his watch just a little too flashy, his presence just a little too demanding. Sadie had dealt with men like him before. They didn't see her. Not really. She was a function, not a person. A walking refill, a background figure, the thing that kept their night running smoothly without ever being acknowledged. Which was fine. It wasn't personal. It was just part of the job. Except tonight, it became very personal. She was balancing a tray of drinks, weaving through tables, when someone stepped too close. A simple miscalculation, a second's bad luck. An elbow clipped hers, and the next thing she knew, a full glass of Bordeaux was tumbling from the tray, flipping in slow motion before making impact, right onto Emmett West's pristine white shirt. There was a collective hush, the kind of silence that spreads like ripples in water. Emmett looked down at the stain, the deep red bleeding through the fabric like a crime scene, and for a second, just a second, Sadie thought he might laugh it off. Maybe shake his head in irritation, wave a hand, accept an apology, and move on. But then, his gaze snapped up to hers, and she knew, he was not that kind of man. "You have got to be joking," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. He pushed his chair back with a deliberate slowness that made her stomach twist. "This is a $15,000 suit." The number did nothing but add weight to the moment, making the onlookers lean in with interest. Sadie opened her mouth, the apology already on the tip of her tongue, but he wasn't interested in hearing it. "Do you even know how to do your job?" he continued, his voice hard and cutting. "I assume that's why you're here. Unless La Cille has started hiring complete incompetence out of pity?" There was a soft, uneasy laugh from his table. Sadie felt her face heat, every muscle in her body locking into place. She had been called worse. She had been yelled at before. But there was something about the way he said it, like she was nothing, that made her want to shrink into the floor. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It was an accident." "An accident," Emmett repeated, shaking his head as he flicked the napkin off his lap. "No, an accident would be something unfortunate but understandable. This is pure incompetence." His eyes cut to the manager, who had materialized at Sadie's side, looking somewhere between horrified and apologetic. "I assume you'll be handling this." The weight of expectation in his tone made it clear, there was only one way to handle this. The manager hesitated for a fraction of a second before straightening. "Sadie," he said, voice tight. "I need you to go." She blinked. "Wait. Now." There was no room for argument. Sadie turned to Emmett, who had already dismissed her, taking his seat again as if nothing had happened. The humiliation clawed at her chest as she unfastened her apron with trembling hands, the murmurs of the restaurant slicing through the ringing in her ears. She was leaving like this? Just like that? Because of a man who thought his wine-stained suit was more important than her rent, her groceries, her ability to pay her bills? She turned away before she did something truly regrettable. The exit was only a few steps away. She just had to keep walking, ignore the heat of embarrassment crawling up her neck, forget the whispers and stares. "I should ruin you for fun," she muttered. It wasn't meant for anyone. Just something bitter, something small and ridiculous to make herself feel slightly less powerless. But a few nearby staff members heard and chuckled. And then she was gone. She had every intention of waking up with a plan. Maybe even some optimism. But reality didn't allow for that. The moment Sadie opened her eyes, the weight of everything she'd lost came crashing down on her chest. She had no job. No paycheck coming. No safety net. The rent was due in less than 2 weeks, her fridge was half empty, and she had exactly $46 in her account. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, willing herself to get up. It didn't work. Her phone buzzed. A text from her landlord. A polite but firm reminder that the next rent cycle was coming up. She let out a long breath and forced herself to sit up. She could figure this out. She had to. She went straight to her laptop, scrolling through job postings, but the pit in her stomach only grew. Every decent job required experience she didn't have, and every job she was qualified for wouldn't be enough to cover rent. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she hesitated, debating whether to apply to anything or sit with the sinking realization that nothing was going to fix itself in time. Her mind drifted back to Emmett West, to his sharp words and dismissive glare. People like him never worried about things like this. They could ruin lives with a flick of their wrist and never think about it again. He was probably sitting in some penthouse, sipping overpriced coffee, oblivious to the fact that he had just sent someone spiraling into a financial crisis. The injustice of it boiled under her skin. She slammed the laptop shut and got up. Moping wouldn't change anything. She had to figure something out. Maybe another restaurant. A different industry. Something. She grabbed her jacket and stepped outside, into a world that had moved on without her, into a day that demanded she figure out how to survive. Emmett opened his eyes to the sound of his phone vibrating angrily on the nightstand. The early morning light cut through the massive windows of his penthouse, illuminating the sleek minimalism of his bedroom, everything gray, black, or chrome, curated to scream wealth without trying too hard. He reached for the phone with a groggy irritation, blinking at the caller ID. It was Theo, his head of security. He answered, voice rough. This better be important. There was no hesitation on the other end. We have a situation. A serious one. Emmett swung his legs over the side of the bed. Define serious. Your accounts. All of them. They're empty. There was a beat of silence before Emmett laughed, short and humorless. That's not possible. Check for yourself. Emmett frowned, grabbing the tablet on his nightstand. His banking app required two-factor authentication, a security measure he had once bragged about in interviews, something about modern billionaires needing to be as smart as they were rich. But now, as the numbers loaded on the screen, he felt his stomach drop. 0. Every single account. Every single investment. His entire empire, gone. He shot to his feet, already moving. Tell me this is a glitch. I wish I could. Theo's voice was controlled but tense. We're trying to trace where the money went, but it's clean, Emmett. No hacks, no external breaches. As of right now, it looks like you authorized the transfers yourself. Emmett felt something rare and unfamiliar creeping in, fear. His wealth wasn't just wealth. It was leverage, power, control. Without it, he was just a man in a penthouse he might not own by the afternoon. He snapped into action, throwing on a crisp shirt, his mind racing. Get the finance team in. Now. No excuses. Within the hour, his office was filled with people who made ungodly salaries to prevent situations like this, all of them shifting uncomfortably as they explained that no, They didn't know how this had happened, and yes, the money was truly gone. Then Theo's voice cut through the chaos. "We found something." Everyone turned. He was standing in the doorway, tablet in hand. "We traced the transfers. The money didn't disappear, it all went to one account." Emmett's patience was razor thin. "Whose?" Theo hesitated. "A woman. Sadie Grant." Silence. Emmett's eyes darkened. "Who the hell is Sadie Grant?" Then, like a switch being flipped, he remembered. The restaurant. The waitress. The humiliation. Emmett had never cared enough to learn her name, but apparently, she had just stolen his entire fortune. Sadie sat at the tiny kitchen table in her apartment, sipping coffee and bracing herself for the inevitable heartbreak of checking her bank balance. She had $37 the last time she checked, and rent was due in 2 days. She tapped her phone screen, fully expecting the numbers to confirm her slow descent into financial ruin. But when the app loaded, she almost dropped the phone. The number on the screen wasn't just wrong, it was delusional. Her balance read $380,497,120. Her breath hitched. The app had to be malfunctioning. She refreshed it. Still there. She closed the app and reopened it. Still there. Her first thought was that someone had made a mistake, a banking error, a deposit meant for someone else. But then she saw the transaction history, line after line of deposits, all coming from one source. Emmett Rhodes. The billionaire who had humiliated her. The man who had demanded she be fired in front of a room full of people like she was nothing. Her heart pounded. What the hell was this? For half a second, she let herself entertain the ridiculous notion that this was some elaborate apology. But billionaires didn't give away money out of guilt, and certainly not that much. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed her coat. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The bank smelled like money. Not literally, of course, but in that way where the air conditioning was always perfectly calibrated, and the pens were attached to their chains like they were worth more than the customers' salaries. Sadie approached the counter, trying to keep her voice steady as she spoke to the woman behind the desk. "There's an issue with my account. I think there's been a mistake." The woman, who had the detached pleasantness of someone who had seen everything, gestured toward the executive banking office. "Mr. Aldridge can assist you." Mr. Aldridge was a tall man with an expensive suit and the kind of overly friendly smile that screamed high net worth client. He gestured for her to sit. "What can I do for you, Ms. Grant?" Sadie swallowed. "I woke up this morning and found a lot of money in my account. It's not mine." He nodded, clicking away at his computer. "Yes, I see the transfers here. All legitimate." She blinked. "That can't be right." He glanced at her over his glasses. "Ms. Grant, these transfers were authorized. Direct transactions, fully verified. There's no error." "But that doesn't make sense," she insisted. "I don't know why he would." She stopped, her stomach twisting. Mr. Aldridge leaned forward slightly. "Is there a concern with the source of the funds?" "Yes." "No. I don't know," she admitted. Are you sure these came from Emmett Rhodes?" "Every cent." Her head spun. She felt lightheaded, like the air in the room had thinned. She was nobody. She had been fired from her minimum wage job a day ago, and now she had more money than she could comprehend. She could fix everything. Pay rent for years, buy a car that wasn't a safety hazard, eat something that didn't come in a discount pack of 12. But this wasn't hers. Sadie stood abruptly. "I have to go." Back in her apartment, Sadie paced. She thought about calling someone, her friend Camille, maybe, but what would she even say? "Hey, remember how I lost my job yesterday? Well, today I accidentally became a billionaire. Her rent was due. The landlord had already given her a warning about being late, and she didn't have a backup plan. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the banking app. The money was just sitting there, as if daring her to do something. It wasn't stealing if it was already in her account, right? It wasn't like Emmett Rhodes was going to be homeless over a couple $1,000s. She exhaled sharply and made a decision. She transferred just enough to cover her rent and overdue bills. Nothing excessive, just what she needed to keep from spiraling. Her finger hovered over the confirmation button for a moment before she pressed it. For the first time in 24 hours, she felt like she could breathe. Theo paced in front of the massive screen in Emmett's private office, the glow of the monitor casting sharp shadows across his face. Numbers and transaction logs scrolled endlessly, the data forming a damning trail. The entire fortune, funneled into one account. Sadie Grant. The waitress. The woman Emmett hadn't thought twice about until she'd somehow become the owner of nearly $400 million overnight. She played you, one of the analysts muttered, shaking his head at the screen. Had to be an inside job. No way some random waitress pulled this off alone. Emmett sat perfectly still, his hands folded on his desk, his jaw tight. He had built an empire on control, on knowing every angle of the game before anyone else even sat down at the table. Yet here he was, blindsided, humiliated, with his entire world tilting dangerously out of his grasp. Theo cleared his throat, his voice carefully neutral. We've begun tracking her. She went to the bank this morning, acted surprised, but that could be an act. Paid off some bills. Other than that, she's been sticking to her usual routine. Emmett's fingers tapped once against the desk. And her communications? Any contact with outside parties? No suspicious calls. No messages tipping anyone off. If she's working with someone, she's being careful. Theo exhaled through his nose, scrolling through another feed. But here's where it gets interesting. We sent someone to keep an eye on her apartment, and they weren't the only ones watching. A black SUV has been tailing her. Emmett's gaze sharpened. Ours? No. There was a flicker of something unreadable in Emmett's expression, a shift in his focus as if the pieces had started arranging themselves into something more dangerous than he had initially assumed. Sadie adjusted her bag strap over her shoulder, shooting another glance behind her. It was probably nothing. She had been walking home for 15 minutes, and every time she turned, the SUV was still there. It wasn't aggressively following her, no screeching tires, no tinted window rolling down ominously. It just was. A block behind. A slow, steady presence that made her pulse quicken. It was ridiculous. She wasn't some spy in a thriller. Maybe she'd seen the same SUV earlier, but there were plenty of black SUVs in the city. It wasn't like they were uncommon. And yet, when she turned the corner onto her street and saw it park a few buildings down, she knew. Her stomach clenched. She didn't go inside. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked past her building entirely, keeping her pace casual despite the growing sense of unease pressing against her ribs. She needed to be somewhere crowded. A place where, if someone actually was watching her, they'd have a harder time making a move. She ducked into a coffee shop on the next block, the noise and warmth instantly wrapping around her. It felt ridiculous to be standing in line, debating between a latte or just asking the barista if they had a panic button. She ordered something, more for the sake of lingering than out of actual desire. Through the window, she could see the SUV still parked. She inhaled slowly, gripping the cup as she debated her next move. Calling the police would be an option if she had any proof that she was in danger. But what would she say? Help, I think a car exists too close to me. It wasn't a crime to park near someone's building. Her phone vibrated, and for a second, she nearly dropped it. But it was just her landlord reminding her that the plumbing was being shut off for maintenance tomorrow. She laughed, but it was a hollow, nervous sound. It wasn't until she stepped back onto the street that she saw the SUV was gone. Emmett checked his watch as his car pulled up outside Sadie's apartment. He hadn't been this personally involved in a search since the early days of building his company, back when every decision felt like it could be the difference between making it and losing everything. Now, his time was supposed to be spent in boardrooms, not hunting down a waitress who had somehow become the key to one of the biggest financial hits he had ever taken. The building was exactly what he expected, run down but not condemned, the kind of place that still had charm if you didn't look too closely at the peeling paint. His men had already been watching for hours. Theo stepped up beside him, nodding toward a parked SUV across the street. "They're still there," he murmured. Emmett's gaze locked onto the vehicle. "Not ours." "No." The tension in the air thickened. They weren't the only ones after Sadie Grant. And that meant this was a hell of a lot bigger than he had originally thought. The park was alive with noise, a swirling mix of laughter, barking dogs, and the hum of weekend conversations. Sadie moved through the chaos, weaving between joggers and families, past a balloon vendor tying ribbons for impatient kids. She didn't slow down, didn't dare to look over her shoulder, but the feeling remained. The pressure at the back of her neck, the certainty that the men from the SUV hadn't disappeared. She cut across a grassy hill, her pulse thrumming in her ears. The open space made her nervous, too exposed, too easy to grab. Her eyes darted toward the food carts ahead, a cluster of tourists debating between pretzels and tacos. Crowds meant safety, or at least a witness or two if someone tried to drag her off the sidewalk. She stopped beside a cart selling iced coffee, forcing herself to breathe normally. The vendor barely looked up as he slid a plastic cup across the counter. Her fingers wrapped around it, cold against her skin, grounding her just enough to think. This was absurd. She was a waitress, not someone who got tailed through the city like she knew too much. Except she didn't know anything, and that was the most terrifying part. The money had landed in her account like some sick joke, and now she was being followed. By who? Emmett Rhodes's people? Some faceless banking security team that thought she was a con artist? Or was it worse? Her stomach twisted. The SUV had been outside her apartment. Waiting. The thought sent her moving again, blending into a group walking toward the exit. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe she'd turn onto her street, and everything would be normal. Except normal was gone. Normal had vanished the second she checked her bank account. She waited until she was a few blocks from the park before slowing her pace. The air was cooler in the shade of the buildings, the sun dipping lower between the rooftops. She turned the corner onto her street, half convinced she'd imagined the entire thing. Then she saw it. The black SUV. Parked across from her building, engine off, but undeniably there. Her mouth went dry. She kept walking, forcing herself to act like she hadn't noticed. She wasn't fast enough. The doors swung open. Two men stepped out, moving with purpose, no hesitation, no wasted motion. Sadie's body reacted before her mind caught up. She turned sharply, running for the entrance to her building, her keys already in her hand. She barely made it to the first step before a hand clamped around her arm. "Let go of me." She twisted, yanking herself backward, but he was stronger, dragging her toward the waiting SUV. A second man reached for her, his grip rough as he pinned her arm against her side. Then everything exploded into motion. Another car screeched to a stop behind them, doors flying open. Sadie barely registered the voices before the man holding her was yanked backward, his grip vanishing. She stumbled, catching herself against the brick wall. The other man turned, reaching for something at his waist, but he didn't get the chance. A fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. Her breath came in sharp gasps, her vision tunneling, the sound of her own heartbeat drowning out everything else. Someone grabbed her wrist, firm but not rough. She flinched, ready to fight, until she saw who it was. Theo. He was watching her with an expression that was equal parts urgency and exasperation. "Come with us if you want to stay alive." She didn't have time to argue. Sadie let herself be pulled toward the waiting car, barely registering the fact that Emmett Rhodes himself was standing by the open door, looking about as pleased as someone who had just lost a poker game to a toddler. She slid inside. The doors shut. The locks clicked. The car sped away. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Sadie pressed herself against the seat, pulse still hammering, her thoughts a chaotic mess of panic and disbelief. Across from her, Emmett watched her like she was some particularly frustrating puzzle he had no patience for. "What the hell is going on?" Her voice came out sharper than intended, but she didn't care. She had been followed, nearly kidnapped, and now she was trapped in a car with the same man whose money had somehow landed in her bank account. Emmett didn't answer right away. He leaned back, studying her, as if trying to decide how much of a headache she was worth. Finally, he exhaled, glancing at Theo. "She doesn't know," Theo said. Emmett's expression barely changed, but something in his jaw tightened. Sadie scowled. "Know what? That people are trying to shove me into cars against my will?" "Yeah, I got that part." Theo ran a hand over his face, muttering something under his breath. Emmett's gaze never left her. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." Sadie let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You mean your money?" "Yeah, I noticed." "You think I did this?" Emmett didn't answer. She leaned forward, gripping the edge of the seat. "Listen, rich guy, I don't know how that money got into my account, but I didn't take it. Do you really think I have the skills to rob you blind? People steal in all kinds of ways." She let out a frustrated noise, throwing her hands up. "That's insane. I don't even know how to use an Excel spreadsheet, let alone commit bank fraud." Theo snorted, quickly turning it into a cough. Emmett's expression remained unreadable. The car slowed, pulling into a long driveway. Sadie barely had time to process the sheer size of the property before they were through the gates, the house looming ahead like something out of a movie about people who never had to worry about checking their credit score. The car stopped. Theo opened the door, nodding toward her. "Let's go." Sadie hesitated. "And if I don't?" Emmett raised an eyebrow. "Then you're welcome to take your chances with the men who just tried to kidnap you." Her stomach dropped. She climbed out of the car. The inside of the house was just as ridiculous as the outside, too clean, too perfect, the kind of place where nothing ever looked out of place. Sadie barely had time to take it in before Emmett was leading the way into what was clearly an office, all dark wood and expensive furniture. He gestured for her to sit. She didn't. He didn't seem surprised. Theo leaned against the wall, arms crossed, while Emmett took his seat behind the desk, watching her like she was an investment that had gone horribly wrong. "You're going to tell me exactly what you know." Sadie crossed her arms. "You first." Emmett exhaled, slow and deliberate, like a man resisting the urge to throw something. "Fine. You want answers? Here's what I know. My accounts were wiped. The money went directly to you. And now, there's someone else trying to get to you before I do. So, tell me, Sadie Grant. Why are you suddenly the most interesting person in this city?" Her fingers dug into her arms. She had no idea. And that terrified her more than anything. The study in Emmett's mansion looked like it belonged to a man who had never lost an argument in his life. Heavy bookshelves lined the walls, the kind filled with books no one ever actually read, but that looked impressive when important people visited. The furniture was sharp-edged and expensive, and the air smelled faintly of leather and whatever cologne rich men wore when they wanted to remind you they could buy an island on a whim. Sadie sat stiffly in the chair across from his desk, arms crossed so tightly that she was practically holding herself together. The room was too quiet, and she hated how Emmett just stared at her, like he was waiting for her to crack under the pressure of his judgment. She had barely processed the fact that she had been dragged into a luxury car, narrowly avoiding getting stuffed into a different one by men who were definitely not offering her a friendly ride. Now, she was trapped in a billionaire's house, facing down the world's most infuriating glare. Emmett leaned forward, fingers steepled like he was a prosecutor building his case. "You stole my money." Sadie let out an incredulous laugh. "I did what?" "You heard me." She threw her hands up. "You think I'm some kind of financial mastermind? I can barely budget my grocery list." Emmett's voice was sharp. $400 million disappeared from my accounts and landed in yours. What am I supposed to think?" Sadie scoffed, pushing herself back against the chair like she was physically trying to get away from the absurdity of this conversation. "I don't know, maybe that something really weird is going on. Maybe that the girl you humiliated in front of your soulless corporate friends didn't wake up one morning and suddenly become an expert hacker." Emmett's jaw tightened. "Do you even hear how ridiculous you sound?" "Oh, I sound ridiculous? That's rich coming from the guy who thinks a waitress somehow bypassed every security system in the world and took down a billionaire." Emmett's patience thinned visibly. "You expect me to believe this is a coincidence?" Sadie's laugh was humorless. "Oh, I don't expect you to believe anything. I expect you to keep being exactly what you are, arrogant, entitled, and completely unwilling to consider that maybe you're not the smartest person in the room." Emmett's eyes darkened. Sadie leaned forward, her voice cutting through the space between them. "Let me spell it out for you. I lost my job because of you. I went home, cried into a frozen pizza, and the next morning, I woke up to more money than I've ever seen in my life. You think I wouldn't have had a meltdown if I had actually planned this?" Emmett's hands pressed against the desk as he stood. "Why would I ever send you money?" Sadie shot to her feet. "I don't know, maybe because you ruined my life in front of a room full of rich people?" The room went still. Emmett's expression shifted, like something he hadn't considered before had just landed squarely in front of him. For the first time since this ridiculous interrogation started, Sadie saw the faintest flicker of doubt in his eyes. Her anger hadn't been calculated. Her panic wasn't an act. She was telling the truth. He sat back down slowly, his gaze locked on her. "You really had nothing to do with this." Sadie exhaled sharply, dropping into her chair again. "Oh wow, what a groundbreaking revelation. Did the oxygen up there finally get to your brain?" Emmett ignored her sarcasm, processing everything with the precision of someone who never liked to admit when they were wrong. His fingers tapped against the desk, his mind already working through the possibilities. If she didn't steal the money, then someone else had framed them both. Theo, who had been leaning silently against the bookshelf, finally spoke. "Then we have a problem." Emmett nodded once. "Find out who else was involved. Start with internal leaks." Theo was already pulling out his phone, walking toward the door with the efficiency of a man who always knew what his next move was. Sadie narrowed her eyes. "What does that mean for me?" Emmett's gaze flicked back to her. "It means you're staying here until we figure out who did this." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "You're a target now," he said simply. "Whoever did this went to a lot of trouble to make you look guilty. You think they're just going to let you go?" Sadie's stomach twisted, the weight of what he was saying sinking in. She had barely escaped being kidnapped an hour ago. There were men out there who had been waiting for her to slip up, to be alone. She crossed her arms, leaning back. "And you're just keeping me here out of the goodness of your heart?" Emmett didn't blink. "I don't do charity, Sadie. But until I get my money back, I don't intend on letting my scapegoat get taken out before I know why she was chosen." She hated that made sense. She hated even more that she didn't actually have anywhere safer to go. Sadie exhaled slowly, glancing at the massive windows behind him. The city stretched out below them, endless and glittering, as if nothing had changed. As if her world hadn't completely tilted on its axis. She turned back to Emmett, her voice tight. "Fine. But I'm not playing house in this oversized villain lair. The second you get your answers, I walk." Emmett's smirk was almost amused. "If you live that long." Sadie didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting. She had no idea what she had just stepped into, but one thing was clear. She wasn't getting out of it anytime soon. Theo stood in Emmett's office, scrolling through data on his tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. The room was dim except for the glow of multiple screens, each one displaying numbers, transaction records, security footage, pieces of a puzzle that finally, after hours of work, were starting to fit together. He didn't look up as Emmett entered, but his voice was sharp and certain. "We found him." Emmett crossed the room, his steps deliberate. "Who?" Theo turned the tablet around, showing a still image from the restaurant's security feed the night of the incident. The resolution was grainy, but the man in the corner was unmistakable. Jasper. Emmett's jaw tightened at the sight of the man sitting calmly in the background of the scene that had set everything into motion. Jasper Crane. The rival he had been fending off for years, the man who thrived on waiting for a moment of weakness and exploiting it for all it was worth. Emmett had been careful, never giving him an inch to work with. But now, Jasper had found an opening, one Emmett hadn't even seen coming. Theo swiped to another frame, this time a close-up of Jasper, sipping a glass of wine, his gaze trained on Emmett's table. He had been watching the entire thing, the spilled drink, the way Emmett reacted, how Sadie stormed out after being fired. He was there, Theo said. He saw it all. Emmett exhaled slowly, working through the implications. Jasper had been waiting for an opportunity, and Emmett had practically handed him one. In a matter of minutes, he had unknowingly created the perfect scapegoat. A waitress, humiliated, fired in public. An easy target. Theo tapped the screen again, flipping to a new set of records. It wasn't just Jasper. He had help. Someone inside. Emmett already knew. He could feel it before Theo even said the name. Darren. The confirmation landed like a weight in his chest. Darren had been by his side for years. His senior financial advisor, a man he had trusted with sensitive deals, high-stakes investments, the kind of wealth that made and destroyed legacies. Darren had been in the room for some of Emmett's biggest business decisions. And now, it turned out, he had been waiting for the right time to sell him out. Theo placed the tablet on the desk. He's the one who made it possible. Jasper had the idea, but Darren gave him everything: internal access, passwords, transaction authorizations. He knew exactly how to drain your accounts and make it look like you sent the money yourself. Emmett stared at the screens, at the digital evidence of betrayal staring back at him. They set it up perfectly, Theo continued. The money was always meant to land in Sadie's account. Jasper planned to grab her, force her to return it, and then leave her as the only suspect. By the time anyone untangled the mess, he'd be long gone. Emmett clenched his jaw, his hands tightening against the desk. Sadie had just been a convenient distraction. A person nobody would think twice about, someone who had a visible grudge against him, making it easy to paint her as the villain. Except it hadn't gone according to plan. Because Sadie hadn't disappeared. She was here, in his house, protected. And Jasper's careful web was beginning to unravel. Theo tapped on the tablet again, pulling up a list of transactions. Darren started moving money around weeks ago. Small, incremental shifts, nothing big enough to trigger alarms, but designed to weaken your liquid assets. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment plan. They've been laying the groundwork for months. Emmett's expression darkened. And Darren? Vanished, Theo said. Went underground the second things started to go sideways. Coward. And Jasper? Theo smirked slightly. Still in the city. He's being careful, but we've got eyes on him. Emmett nodded once. Good. Let him think he's still in control. Theo hesitated. And Sadie? Emmett exhaled, tilting his head back slightly. That was the part that complicated everything. Sadie wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be a factor at all. She should have been taken before he even realized what had happened, and the fact that she was still sitting in his house meant that Jasper had lost the upper hand. We keep her here, Emmett said finally. Until we figure out how to end this. Theo gave a short nod before stepping out of the office, leaving Emmett alone with the weight of the betrayal, the anger burning low and steady in his chest. This wasn't over. Not even close. Jasper paced the length of his penthouse, the city lights sprawling beneath him like a sea of opportunity he had once thought was his for the taking. Now, the walls felt tighter, the windows less like a view and more like a cage. He gripped his phone, jaw tight as the voice on the other end fed him update after update, none of it good. The money's locked down. Rhodes's got his people digging deep. And the girl, she's still with him. Jasper exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Still? Why hasn't she been dealt with? She's under tight security. We missed our chance. Missed their chance. The phrase made his stomach churn. Everything had been meticulously planned. Emmett would lose his empire, Sadie would take the fall, and by the time anyone pieced it together, Jasper would be untouchable. But somehow, against all odds, the waitress had survived the setup. Worse, she was now sitting under Emmett's protection. Jasper turned toward the window, eyes narrowing. If Sadie Grant was still breathing, then she was a threat. He took a slow breath, gripping his phone tighter. I don't care what it takes. Take her out. Before she talks. The voice on the other end hesitated. Rhodes's got security everywhere. It won't be easy. Then get creative, Jasper snapped. I don't want excuses, I want results. There was a pause before the voice confirmed, understood. Jasper ended the call, tossing the phone onto his desk. His fingers drummed against the glass, his mind racing. Emmett was no fool, he had to know by now that Sadie wasn't safe. And if he had half the instincts Jasper assumed he did, he was already fortifying his walls. Emmett stood in his office, staring at the surveillance feeds that covered every inch of his estate. The security system had been upgraded overnight, more guards stationed at the perimeter, cameras recalibrated. Theo stood beside him, scrolling through his tablet, his expression set in stone. Double the detail at the front gates. No one gets in without clearance, Emmett instructed. Theo nodded. Done. But that's not the real problem. Emmett's gaze didn't waver from the screens. Darren. Theo exhaled, his fingers tightening around the edge of the tablet. He's gone. Slipped through every traceable exit. No credit card use, no travel records, no burner phones. He knew the second things fell apart that he had to disappear. Emmett's jaw clenched. Darren was a strategist. He had been smart enough to orchestrate one of the cleanest betrayals Emmett had ever seen, and now he was smart enough to run. That didn't mean he was uncatchable. Theo tapped the screen, pulling up a new set of data. He left his apartment in a hurry. Surveillance picked him up exiting with a single bag, looking over his shoulder. He's scared. Emmett's lips pressed into a thin line. Good. That means he'll make a mistake. He already did, Theo said, a smirk ghosting over his lips. He turned the tablet to face Emmett. A still image showed Darren at a bus station, hood pulled up, sunglasses covering his face. But it was him. He's running low-tech, Theo continued. No digital trail, no private jets. Just him, cash, and whatever bad decisions he can make under pressure. Emmett's gaze sharpened. Where's he headed? We don't know yet. But we've got people tracking him. Emmett straightened. Then we move now. The next few hours were a blur of movement. Theo's team was already in the field, combing through Darren's possible routes, tracking every shaky lead that could bring them closer. Emmett didn't leave his office, staying glued to the updates rolling in through the monitors. Got him, a voice crackled through the speaker. Emmett leaned forward. Where? Gas station outside the city. He just bought a burner phone. Sloppy. Emmett's expression was unreadable. Bring him in. Darren hadn't expected to be found so quickly. He had spent years being careful, priding himself on his ability to blend, to disappear when necessary. But the second the black SUV cut him off outside the gas station, he knew. His hands clenched around the plastic bag holding his burner phone, heart hammering. He turned, ready to bolt, but two men were already on him. No sudden moves, one of them warned. Darren's mind raced. He had two choices, run and fail, or negotiate. He swallowed hard, raising his hands slowly. I want to make a deal. The words were barely out of his mouth before he was shoved into the back seat of the SUV, the door slamming shut behind him. The ride was silent, tension thick in the air. Darren tried not to fidget as they wove through the streets, bringing him straight into the belly of the beast. When the car finally stopped, Darren was dragged inside Emmett's estate, his feet barely catching up with the force of the hands gripping his arms. The office door opened, and there he was, Emmett Rhodes, sitting behind his desk like a king ready to deliver judgment. Theo shut the door behind them, crossing his arms. Emmett tilted his head slightly, studying Darren like an insect under glass. Tell me why I shouldn't have you buried, Emmett said, his voice cold. Darren forced a weak smile. Because I can give you Jasper. Theo scoffed. How convenient. Emmett leaned forward, his gaze sharp. You think I need you to take Jasper down? Darren hesitated. I think I know things you don't. Emmett didn't blink. Start talking. Darren exhaled slowly. Jasper planned this for months. The money, the setup, Sadie, it was all meant to play out perfectly. But you changed the game. You kept her alive. That's why he's desperate. Emmett's fingers drummed against the desk. Darren swallowed hard. Jasper's trying to tie up loose ends. He's coming for Sadie. The room was silent. Theo shifted slightly. And what do you want in return? Darren straightened. Immunity. Emmett's smirk was slow and sharp. You think you deserve that? I think you want Jasper more than you want me. Emmett exhaled through his nose, considering. He had known Jasper was desperate, but if Darren was right, then they were on borrowed time. Finally, Emmett leaned back. Fine, he said. But if you so much as breathe wrong, you won't get the chance to run again. Darren nodded, relief washing over his face. Theo turned to Emmett. What now? Emmett's eyes darkened. Now we end this. The restaurant was quiet, the kind of exclusive place where deals were made in hushed voices over plates that cost more than a week's salary. Emmett sat at the corner booth, his posture relaxed, but his gaze sharp as he swirled the whiskey in his glass. Across from him, Jasper strolled in like he owned the place, his suit crisp, his confidence unchecked. I have to admit, Jasper said as he slid into the booth, I wasn't expecting this call. Emmett offered a slow smirk, tipping his glass slightly. Thought it was time we talked. Jasper chuckled, motioning for a drink from the waiter without breaking eye contact. That's interesting, considering you've spent the past week running around like a man with his empire on fire. Emmett exhaled, as if conceding the point. I'll give you credit. You put on a good show. Jasper leaned back, clearly pleased with himself. It's what I do. Emmett kept his expression neutral, but inside, his patience was wearing thin. The smugness, the arrogance, it would all come crashing down soon enough. He just needed Jasper to do what men like him always did. Keep talking. I have to ask, Emmett continued, resting an elbow on the table, why her? Of all the ways to take me down, why pin it on some waitress? Jasper's smirk deepened as he picked up his drink. Because she was perfect. You made it too easy. The way you humiliated her. It was the ideal setup. A nobody with nothing to lose, just angry enough that people would believe she did it. Emmett nodded slowly, pretending to process the information like it was new. And Darren? He was in on it from the beginning? Jasper laughed, taking a slow sip. Oh, Emmett. You think you're the only one people are loyal to? Darren was tired of being your errand boy. He saw the opportunity, and I gave him an out. Emmett let a small smile cross his lips, as if amused. An out. Right. Jasper leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. And before you get any bright ideas, there's no proof. No paper trail, no messages. It's just your word against mine. And we both know how that would play out. Emmett let the moment stretch, let Jasper sit in his confidence, bask in the victory he thought was his. Then, he reached into his pocket and placed his phone on the table, screen still lit up. The recording app was still running. Jasper's smirk faded. Emmett tilted his head slightly, watching him like a man who had already won. You were saying? Jasper's expression hardened as he reached for the phone, but before his fingers could make contact, the doors burst open. The restaurant filled with movement as officers swarmed the space, their voices cutting through the low hum of conversation. Jasper barely had time to react before a firm hand clamped onto his shoulder, shoving him forward against the table. The officer's voice was calm but firm. Jasper Crane, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and grand larceny. Jasper's shock morphed into rage as he turned back toward Emmett, who remained seated, watching the scene unfold with cool detachment. You set me up, Jasper hissed. Emmett picked up his whiskey, taking a slow sip. You set yourself up. As the officers pulled Jasper to his feet, his protests turned sharp. You have nothing. A recording doesn't prove anything. Emmett didn't bother responding. Instead, he gestured toward the man standing near the entrance. Darren stepped forward. Jasper stilled. The betrayal was evident in his expression, the realization that his last possible escape route had just disappeared. Darren adjusted his jacket, looking almost regretful. Sorry, Jasper. But I like my odds better on this side. Jasper struggled against the officers as they led him away, his voice carrying across the restaurant. This isn't over, Rhodes. Emmett watched as the doors closed behind them, then set his glass down with a quiet clink. Oh, he muttered, I think it is. Emmett sat behind his desk, staring at the numbers on the screen, watching as his fortune reassembled itself piece by piece. The crisis was officially over. His accounts were reinstated, the company was stabilized, and every transaction Jasper and Darren had manipulated was being meticulously reversed. The emails pouring in from his board members were filled with cautious relief, some congratulating him on outmaneuvering his enemies, others pretending they hadn't been moments away from abandoning ship when things had looked bad. Theo stood in front of the desk, scrolling through his own reports. Jasper's legal team is scrambling, but there's not much they can do. Fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud, attempted kidnapping, you name it, we've got it. Between the recordings and Darren's testimony, he'll be lucky if he sees daylight before he's eligible for retirement. Emmett didn't look away from his screen. And Darren? Officially cooperating, Theo said. He gave Jasper up in exchange for a lighter sentence. Still a backstabbing piece of garbage, but at least he's a useful one. Emmett exhaled through his nose. It should have felt like victory. He had spent the last week clawing his way out of a disaster, one that could have destroyed everything he had built. And now, everything was back in place. His fortune. His reputation. His power. So why did it feel unfinished? Theo smirked slightly, reading his silence. You know there's still one thing left. Emmett already knew. He pushed back from his desk, straightening his jacket. Where is she? Kitchen. Theo's smirk deepened as Emmett shot him a look, but he said nothing as he walked out of the office. Sadie was in the kitchen, aggressively buttering a piece of toast like it had personally wronged her. She didn't look up when Emmett walked in, just kept stabbing at the bread. I don't know why I'm still here, she said flatly. Emmett leaned against the counter, watching her. Because you haven't left. She finally glanced up, narrowing her eyes. Because you still have my stuff. You got your stuff back last night, Emmett reminded her. Sadie set the butter knife down with an exasperated sigh. So what, then? You're just waiting for me to shake your hand and tell you what a great guy you are? Emmett exhaled, his fingers pressing against the marble countertop. No. I came to apologize. That made her pause. She leaned back against the counter, crossing her arms. Apologize? For assuming the worst of you, Emmett said simply. For making it easy for everyone else to do the same. Sadie studied him for a moment, something unreadable flickering behind her expression. Then she let out a short, humorless laugh. You humiliated me. And then when your life went up in flames, your first reaction was to blame me. Do you have any idea what that was like? Emmett met her gaze. I do now. Sadie shook her head, looking away for a moment. Do you know how many people were ready to throw me in jail? People I'd never even met? People who didn't know a thing about me? And why? Because you pointed a finger, and suddenly I was a criminal. Emmett didn't argue. He didn't offer excuses. You could have ruined my life, Sadie continued, her voice quiet but sharp. And I don't even think you would have lost sleep over it. Emmett exhaled. You're right. Sadie blinked, clearly not expecting that. I was arrogant, Emmett admitted. And careless. And I didn't stop to think about the consequences of my actions. I made you a target, and I didn't even realize it. Sadie crossed her arms, tilting her head. And now you do? I do. She let out another short laugh, shaking her head. Well. Personal growth looks good on you, I guess. Emmett reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, setting it on the counter. Sadie eyed it warily. What's that? A settlement, Emmett said. Compensation for what you went through. She didn't move to take it. How much is in there? Enough that you'll never have to worry about money again. Sadie stared at the envelope like it was something radioactive. Then, to Emmett's complete disbelief, she picked it up and immediately tossed it in the trash. He blinked. That was a significant amount of money. Yeah, I got that, she said, grabbing her coffee. You didn't even look at the number. Didn't need to. Emmett had been prepared for anger. For yelling. For snark. What he hadn't been prepared for was outright refusal. You know, he said carefully, most people wouldn't throw away a chance to change their life. Sadie let out a sharp laugh. Oh, and how would you know? When was the last time you had to decide whether to pay rent or buy groceries? Emmett didn't answer. Sadie sighed, rubbing her temples. Look, I appreciate the gesture. I really do. But I don't want your money. I just want to move on. Emmett tilted his head. Then what do you want? She considered that for a moment, then shrugged. A fresh start. On my terms. Emmett watched her carefully. And where does that take you? Anywhere but here. Emmett nodded once. Sadie picked up her coffee, taking a slow sip before giving him a look. And you? What happens now that you've won? Emmett smirked slightly. I rebuild. Sadie shook her head, amused. Of course you do. She started toward the door, then paused, glancing back at him. You know, you could try being a little less of a jerk. Emmett raised an eyebrow. I could. Sadie grinned. But you won't. And with that, she walked out, leaving Emmett alone in his kitchen with an untouched settlement, an unfinished apology, and the distinct feeling that, for once, winning didn't feel quite the way it used to. The Florida air carried the scent of salt and warm pavement, the kind of thick, sun-drenched atmosphere that made everything feel both laid back and endlessly full of possibility. Sadie stood in front of her food truck, hands on her hips, taking in the view. The ocean stretched out in the distance, a glittering, endless blue. Seagulls hovered near the boardwalk, eyeing tourists with the confidence of creatures that had never paid for a meal in their lives. People strolled by in flip-flops and sunglasses, their laughter mixing with the sound of waves crashing against the shore. She had made it. The truck wasn't fancy, but it was hers. A vintage Airstream, polished and restored, with a bold blue stripe running across the sides and Sadie's Bites painted in big, playful letters. She had spent weeks putting it together, sanding and repainting, learning how to hook up the plumbing, navigating the truly ridiculous maze of food vendor permits. But now, finally, it was ready. She had done it all herself. No investors, no loans, no strings attached. She had walked away from Emmett's offer of financial compensation without regret. Not because she was above it, but because she wanted to know, needed to know, that she could do this on her own terms. After everything, after the insanity of being framed for a financial crime she didn't commit, after almost being kidnapped, after being dragged into a world of power and money she had no business being in, this was what she wanted. Something simple. Something real. She ran her fingers over the edge of the order window, her pulse quickening. It was almost time to open. A checklist was tucked into her back pocket, filled with scribbled notes from the night before. Ice stocked. Bread prepped. Sauce containers labeled. The menu, a carefully curated mix of sandwiches, fries, and the kind of no-nonsense comfort food she had always wanted to serve, was printed and taped neatly to the side of the truck. She stepped back, wiping her hands on her apron. This was it. She reached for the little plastic open sign suction to the window and hesitated for half a second. Then she flipped it over. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. She busied herself double-checking the grill temperature, making sure everything was exactly where she needed it to be. Then a man approached, middle-aged, sunburned, wearing a Hawaiian shirt that should have been illegal. Two kids clung to either side of him, one whining, the other dragging a stuffed dolphin across the pavement. "What do you recommend?" he asked, squinting at the menu. Sadie grinned. "Depends. You looking for something classic or something you'll dream about later?" He laughed, clearly charmed. "I like the confidence. Surprise me." She got to work, flipping bread onto the griddle, layering cheese, butter, and a few secret ingredients she had spent months perfecting. The sandwich came together beautifully, golden, crisp, gooey in all the right places. She wrapped it up, handed it over, and waited. The man took a bite. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. Oh, wow. His kids immediately tried to steal a piece. Sadie smirked. Told you. Before she had even finished the first order, more people had wandered over. A couple on vacation, a group of college students, an older woman walking her dog. The line formed naturally, word spreading as people took their first bites and reacted exactly the way she had hoped they would. It was working. She took order after order, moving through the motions with a rhythm that felt right. This wasn't like working in some fancy restaurant where she had to paste on a polite smile and act like the customer berating her about the temperature of their steak was the most important person on the planet. These were real people, stopping by for good food, no pretense, no power dynamics. Just food, money, and a transaction that left them both happy. A woman with sunglasses perched on her head leaned against the counter, watching Sadie work. You new around here? Brand new, Sadie confirmed, wrapping up a sandwich and passing it over. You picked a good spot, the woman said, taking a bite. Not a lot of places on this side of the boardwalk doing it right. Sadie felt a small flicker of pride. Well, I plan on sticking around. She meant it. As the lunch rush settled, she finally had a moment to catch her breath. She leaned out of the truck window, watching the ocean, letting the warm breeze cut through the lingering heat from the grill. It was strange, after everything, to feel calm. Emmett had probably forgotten all about her by now, busy reclaiming his throne at the top of the business world. She had followed the headlines at first, watching as his company recovered, as Jasper was dragged through the courts, as Darren was shoved into the kind of deal that ensured he wouldn't see the inside of a boardroom ever again. But after a while, she had stopped checking. Not because she didn't care, but because it wasn't her life anymore. She had survived it. She had come out the other side. And now, she was exactly where she wanted to be. A few more customers trickled in, and she went right back to work, pouring fries into baskets, flipping sandwiches, chatting with people who were already becoming regulars. Hours passed without her even realizing it. By sunset, she was exhausted, but in the best possible way. She pulled off her apron, stretching out her shoulders, and took one last look at the truck. It had been a good day. A great day. She reached for the open sign, hesitated again, then shook her head. No. She wasn't closing yet. She had spent too much time waiting for things to go wrong. Waiting for someone to pull the rug out from under her. Waiting for a reason to second-guess herself. Not anymore. She leaned against the counter, watching the last of the sunset, and smiled. She was exactly where she was supposed to be.